Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our session, #AMG Grounding with Chava. I would like to introduce Chava to you all if you haven't met her yet at one of our amazing core courses at UCLA. Chava has been with UCLA since 2016 and is a senior learning and development specialist with the talent management team. Chava's area of expertise includes leadership skills, emotional intelligence, change management, and building workplace relationships. She provides learners with practical tools that help them enhance their work life while building healthier connections with all of those we serve. And so welcome, Chava, and thank you for being here with us. I will let you take the lead.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right, everybody. Hello. As Carla said, my name is Chava, and I'm a senior learning and development specialist. And I absolutely love what I get to do in terms of connecting with everybody today. So I'm really excited to be able to connect with you all. And the topic that we're going to be discussing today is ending unproductive meetings, right? Whether this be virtual or in person, right? I think we can all agree that we have had some unproductive meetings, or that we take place in unproductive meetings. So we're going to dissect that. We're going to look at why that happens and how we can start to really eliminate that on our end and what we bring to the table. So without further ado, let me go ahead and pull up my slide deck. And as you might be able to tell, allergies have gotten the best of me. I don't know if it's windy by anybody else, but man, the wind has not been my friend this year. So thank you for bearing with me. A good quick tip note is that if you are congested, maybe don't facilitate a meeting so people don't get distracted by that. All right, here we go. Any unproductive meeting. So what we're going to really start to dissect is, why are meetings unproductive? What do people really need out of a meeting to begin with in order to get the most of it? Because the point of a meeting is to walk away with information that's tangible, right? That we can go do something with. If it's just nice to know information, you don't really need to have a meeting about that, right? There's other avenues where you can pursue that kind of information. So we really want to have meetings that we have those takeaways, people are digesting what we're saying, and there are actionable items that follow that. So in order to start to dissect this with you a little bit more here, I want to bring up the Crown Plaza. So the Crown Plaza is a hotel, and they did a study on virtual meetings. And they were discussing the cost that they were losing, right, from virtual meetings. They were actually losing. And what they had found was that in the meetings, when you have face-to-face meetings, there's more value there. You take away more, you can gain more. So this is what they really saw. They saw a key advantage of face-to-face meetings, according to the respondents, is that all the visual clues needed to avoid misunderstanding was present, right? So all the visual cues. This is something we don't necessarily have via Zoom or in a virtual setting. We can't really pick up on everybody's visual cues, which makes it a lot harder to interpret information. Sometimes we start to create our own stories about the information. So it can be very challenging in that regard, right? A full 96% said they had correctly predicted a positive outcome from face-to-face meetings based on nonverbal clues, with the most predictable being good eye contact.
Chava?
Yeah.
Apologies. Can you help us with the sound? It's sounding a little, it's breaking up a little bit. Yeah.
Sure, no problem at all.
Thank you.
So stop sharing. The choppiness could be my streaming point. So I'll stop sharing. I'll do this conversation based, and then I'll share slides anyway. PowerPoint slides aren't necessarily needed throughout a whole training anyway for you to get the good information. So if anybody's having any trouble, just let me know as well. I'm happy to continue to navigate that. So what that study was showing from the Crown Plaza was really that you need face-to-face interaction to really identify what somebody's saying, right? For you to take in that information. We don't always have that luxury, and sometimes it's not necessarily a luxury. We like to work remote, but we are missing avenues. So it's something for you to be aware of. And then I want to share this with you. I'm going to give you a moment to read this over. This was a study done at MIT. And this study talked about virtual meetings. So poorly run meetings have a tremendous negative impact on team success, innovation, creativity, and on individual well-being and stress. In fact, experiencing a poor meeting can even result in a meeting recovery syndrome, where employees lose additional time and productivity mentally recovering from a bad meeting. So just take that in for a second. And if you are so willing, how many of you can maybe relate to that? In the chat, let me know. How many of you can maybe relate to the fact that you had a meeting, it was not a great meeting, and you feel like you need to recover from the meeting, and you sit there like, oh my gosh, and you lose time, you lose productivity. You don't feel like you can be as creative or as innovative because that meeting took so much. Yes, right? Absolutely. I see thumbs up. I see things coming into the chat. So why would we want to conduct meetings this way? Yes, right, with both in-person and remote meetings. Yeah, right. So we all have experienced this. So this is telling us, wait a second, we need to take a second and we really need to pause and say, what is a good meeting? What does that consist of? What do people do with good meetings? How do we avoid feeling that way? And the way that we can do that is really by increasing our skill base, our knowledge base of what we're about, of what we're doing. But we have to point out, okay, well, what goes wrong in a virtual meeting? And in order to see what goes wrong, that's how you're going to figure out how to mitigate that. So let me show you the first thing. So right here, virtual meetings. Virtual communication is hard to remember. Virtual communication is hard to remember. Okay, let that sink in for a second. How many of you in the chat feel like after you have a training session, in order to remember everything that we talked about, you would like a copy of this slide deck? How many of you think that would be most helpful for you to really understand the information? Right? Yeah, a couple of us are like, yep, 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 absolutely. And why? Right? Yes, a copy of the slide deck. And this goes to virtual communication is hard to remember, right? And that's not because of my facilitation, right? Everybody, right? It's like I'm good facilitating, but it's because virtual communication is hard. It's not on anybody. It doesn't matter who's facilitating the meeting. There's so many distractions. How many of you maybe have your Outlooks up or you have your Teams up and there's other things going on around you and you're present, but there's still other things happening around you? Even my remote library program, I printed everything because I retain better, right? So yeah, exactly, right? It's like I have this remote situation, but I still print things out. Yeah, right? Because it's just hard because there's so much going on around us. And even in that small moment, when you're trying to focus online to what somebody's saying, but you hear something in another office, you hear something outside, your mind kind of goes, oh, what's that? Without you even realizing it. So you're not really retaining all the information. Okay, so something for you to all know, because when you are facilitating a meeting, it has nothing to do with your team not wanting to be present or your team checking out or your team not here. It's just virtual communication is a lot harder to remember. So having the different areas where we say, okay, let's follow up with a printed agenda, or let me email them this so that they can see it visually, or whatever it is, right? Just like I'll send you all this slide deck so that you can have all the information where you can access it when you need it. So virtual communication is really hard to remember. The next thing, here we go. Lack of social cues. Lack of social cues. Okay, so let's talk about this one. Lack of social cues. Do you think I can gauge right now how majority of you are feeling in this Zoom meeting? Probably not. I think I can gauge Heidi. right? I can probably gauge how Heidi and Carla are doing. And why is that, right? To call everybody out and not make you feel uncomfortable, right? Why is that? Because we have our cameras off. How I don't know what anybody's feeling or thinking, and that's not in any way to make anybody feel uncomfortable or feel like you have to come on camera. I totally respect the fact that you're not on camera right now, but it does create a lack of social cues. So I wouldn't be able to gauge if somebody has something to say just looking at your screens. I wouldn't really be able to gauge if you're present, if you're not, right? So the same thing happens in a meeting. Now, even if I'm on a meeting, right? Sometimes not everyone's engaged. Yeah, exactly. So even if I'm on a meeting and I'm looking at everybody, I'm also like, wait, are people engaged? Are they not engaged? It's really hard to sometimes pinpoint that because there's also, you can't really see where their eyes are looking, right? Or sometimes, unfortunately, you can, and you can see their heads going like this, looking at their other screens, right? To the point being, there's also so much going on that it makes it so much harder because you can't pick up on all those things. You can't pick up if people are feeling uncomfortable, if they're feeling stressed out, right? You can't pick that up virtually right away. Now, how do we mitigate this? Somebody might ask, like, well, what am I supposed to do about that? The lack of social cues. What do you think you do? If I'm on a meeting with you and I'm like, well, I don't really know how Heidi's feeling. How am I going to figure that out? Yeah, I think Heidi, you mouthed it. Ask. Yeah, ask. Right? We have to ask questions. We have to say, hey, how's it going? I can't really, and it's okay to tell people, I can't really gauge how you're feeling right now. So if you want to tell me, if you're uncomfortable telling me in this open forum, please, talk, let's follow up privately, whatever it is, but you got to ask. Because then if you have the thought, well, they're all just disengaged, maybe that's not even what's going on, right? Maybe there's something else going on. So again, we don't know what we don't know. And the only way we could really figure that out is if we ask. And you could tell your team, hey, I can't pick up social cues on Zoom really. I could see head nods or I could see people kind of looking, but I don't really know. So if there's something you like, give me the social cue, give me the thumbs up. If there's something you don't like, give me the thumbs down. Like actually do this, right? So you can try to get creative while trying to figure out social cues, but it is an area to recognize this makes meetings feel a little less productive, especially because then people go into that mindset of, oh, this is awkward. And then you kind of lose it in that sort of space, right? Yeah, following slide deck, chat feed, and attending videos all at once is challenging even without following slide decks, chat feed. Yes, Stacy. Yes, I had to read that a second time to get to understand what you're saying. Yeah, all of that is challenging. It's something that even as a trainer, I have to be on my slide deck. I have to make sure everybody's here. I still have to check the chat. It's definitely something that's challenging. Now, it's also challenging for me is my job, right? So this is what I do. So I've gotten my flow with it a little bit. And it's still challenging sometimes, depending on how many people I have in class, right? But that is a challenge, especially if you don't do it all the time or you're not practicing it all the time, right? So if you're having struggling with that particular area, focus on one. Say, hey, you know what? For today's meeting, let's not do chat. Let's raise hands and let's have conversations as if we were in person. Let's not do the chat today. Right. So you try to see if you can maybe eliminate one area so you don't feel like you have all of it. Also, a lot of things don't, we're going to talk about it in a moment, but unless it's data and people really need to see, you don't need to have a slide deck. You really don't. You can have conversation. You can send it in an email. There's other ways to do it. So you don't always need a slide deck if it's not the appropriate medium, right? If it is, great. But if you're just like, oh, I want to give them something visual, you don't have to always do that, right? So try to see maybe where you can find ways to use less of the forums and try to engage people with speaking, right? Having conversation. So see, that's could potentially help there too. Another area that we have trouble with is this area, short attention span. Right? You jump on a meeting and everyone's like, okay, I'm present. I'm here for the first 30 seconds. I'm in it to win it. And it's like, ding, phone goes off, messages, this one, that one. And you're like, oh, wow. Like right now I have my work phone. I have my personal phone. I have my Teams. It's just too much. It's just too much. You have a short attention span, right? And I know some of us are working remotely. I know some of us on site. I work hybrid, and I get distracted sometimes too, because the way that I have my office set up is there's a window and I could see if my dogs are running up the hill. Sometimes I see them and they're getting in little dog fights with the people behind the gate, So I'm like, oh my gosh, right? So there's distractions, and we have short attention spans. So what do we do about short attention spans? If you have something very pertinent that you need to tell your team in a meeting, how do you think you should start that meeting? How might you start it? Might be a little bit challenging for all my most important topic first. Yes, front load the important stuff. Absolutely. Yep, exactly. With the most important information. So sometimes this is going to be very hard for my people centric, and I know everybody here is a people centric person. Not everybody wants to tell you about their weekend on a Monday. Okay. Sometimes they're just like, get to the point. It's Monday. Right. So there are ways for you to still be very interpersonal with your teams, but getting to the point quickly. Right. And that's not you saying like, it's not about not caring about everybody. Just sometimes it's not the appropriate forum. It's like, hey, everybody have a great weekend. Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely great. All right. I have some important information. So for today, I'm just going to really dive into what we have to do. People will appreciate that. It's not you not being personal or caring. It's just you have information you need to front load, right? Let's see. Tell them what you're going to cover it, recap what you covered. Yes, right? For short attention spans too, you want to make sure you confirm the understanding. That's great. With an agenda stating what will be covered. Yeah, absolutely, right? So again, short attention spans. This is not because people aren't professional. This is not because people don't care. It's because virtual world is so challenging. Our attention spans aren't as long staring at a screen, okay? Also, when you're in person, sometimes people are also like, I want to get to the meeting. I got to go check some stuff. People are always in this go, go, go mode for the most part, right? Like always exceptions to the rule. So I will say that. But for the most part, we're in this go, go, go mentality. So people really want to know what to do and then leave the meeting, right? So just remember that short attention spans, and maybe structure your meetings as if the whole team has a short attention span and you want to get the information up front, okay? Then the other area that we have, this is particularly for Zoom, right, is that not everyone is in the same environment. So this can be really tricky for some people because some people have the luxury of having their own office space if they're working remote, or even if they're on site. People might not share an office space and some people might share an office space, right? So we never really know, especially if you're on virtual, what's behind people's backgrounds, right? So you can have somebody who, you can't really tell what's going on, right? She looks like she's in a great environment, right? Comfortable office, everything looks good. But really, this is what's going on. This is her office space. It's just a different environment, right? There's stuff everywhere, but like it looks good from the back, but you can't tell everything else that's going on, right? So here's another one. Looks super put together, everything's good, but really this is what's happening, right? And it's not only just the space. Sometimes we have guests, all right? We have guests that join our meetings and you're just like, this is just what it is today. So everybody has different environments. Now, I know if you're on site, you might not have the same guests, but you might have people walking in and out. I've been on plenty trainings where I have had staff, and they have, if they're back office, they have different MAs or LVNs or whoever is in the office, different doctors coming into the in and out of the space, right? So that's still kind of a distraction, and that's in their space while they're trying to be present. They have people that still need them. They have things going on. So we all have different environments too when we're having virtual meetings. So we have to be very aware of that, right? So again, knowing that the environment, the short attention span, right? The fact that we're trying to get all this information virtually, or even in person, it's a lot. There's just a lot going on. So on this slide, I'm going to show you the best Zoom meeting and the best meeting. And you'll see there's nothing on this slide because the best meeting is the one that didn't exist. Right? No, I'm just kidding. No, all meetings are good, right? So I'm just joking. We're really going to learn some information here, but I'm just being facetious. But there are times when that's what people think. They're like, wait, the best meeting is the one I don't have to go to, the one I can get off my calendar. And really, that's how I want to approach it. But for today, we know we do have meetings that we have to attend. So let's start to really plan this out. Okay, so for this next part, where I'm going to mention everything, I want to be very tangible so that you can take this away and implement it ASAP. So what I would like for you to do, can everybody identify a meeting, whether it be virtual or on site, that they have coming up within the next, today's Thursday, maybe within the next week, or today's Friday, today's not even Thursday. Oh my gosh, allergies, messing with my mind. All right, so can everybody identify a meeting that they have next week? I'm sure we all can, okay? I want you to start to plan your meeting accordingly to all these tips. Okay, so map out your meeting. What's the meeting for? And here, let's go over some of our tips. So the first thing that you want to do with this meeting, again, what I will say, with the caveat I will say, I'm a very people person. I do think it's important to not just necessarily jump right into everything, but do have that moment of good morning, how is everybody? You have that small banter, but I would say you can limit it also. You don't need to do a round robin of how everybody's weekend was and what everybody did with their weekend, right? You can just say, you know, everybody have their coffee, have their water. I hope everybody had a great weekend. It's so good to see you all. You can have a moment like that, but it doesn't need to last too long, okay? So I just want to highlight the intention there. The first thing you want to do, provide data first. If you have data that you need to give somebody, tell them right away. Because if you start the meeting off with all the small items and then you have a big data point that you need to share out, they're not going to be fully present because they've already been in the meeting for how long that it's going to feel like, oh, okay, one more thing and then we're almost done, right? So if there's real information you need, like we said, front load it, okay? Because think about different data points that you've gotten, you know, if on a meeting where you're like, oh man, this isn't, I'm not digesting this. And what I also want you to consider, the data that you're going to be sharing, does it need to be a meeting or can it be an email first? All right, because if you're going to give a ton of numbers, by the way, like you're giving numbers, you're giving metrics, whatever it is, you might want to email that so people can look at it, digest it, and then follow up with, okay, does anybody have any questions about that? What was everybody's understanding? You can confirm understanding to make sure everybody is on the same page, but maybe you don't need the initial meeting to debrief everything. So it can feel like a lot. I'll leave that up to your discretion because you know your teams better than I do. So that would look very different for each person's team. All right, so next question I have, does everybody here know who is attending their next meeting? Is that easy for you to pull up? Who's attending your next meeting? Okay. So here is my question for you regarding your next meeting. Is don't over invite. Does everybody who you invited need to be there? Or was it like some of them were like nice to have? Maybe everybody does, right? That could be the case, but maybe they don't. And I want you to actually take a look at your calendars next week. Do you need to be in every meeting that's on your calendar? Is there a meeting that you're like, do I need to be in this one? Because if there's a meeting where you're questioning it, I want to encourage you, send the email and say, do I need to be at this meeting? In fact, I'll give you 30 seconds now to identify that and get that email ready for draft. Sounds going off. Okay, thank you, Jose. I'll stick like this for a little bit. So if you don't need to be at a meeting, take it off your list. Take it off your list of things to do. Because yes, if you're leading a meeting, there's going to be, you want to make sure you're being mindful of this, but also for yourself. You don't want to be burnt out. You don't want to attend things you don't need to attend, because then you're going to have meeting syndrome recovery, right? So like you're going to be sitting down and saying, oh my gosh, I like don't even know why I was there. So if you find something, a meeting that you're like, I don't think I need to be there, look at the meeting, write down what it is. Who are you going to contact to say, do I need to be at this? And it's actually a very cathartic thing to do to get some time back in your day. There's a lot of meetings on my schedule, and sometimes I'll email my manager, like, do you need me at this? Or was this like, did you just want to include me so I felt included? And sometimes like, oh, I just wanted you to be included. I'm like, I really don't want to be included. So it's totally okay. You can take me off that meeting. I still know you guys care about me. So it's one of those things where it's like, yeah, it's nice to be included, but I don't always need to be included. I like some time. So take a look for yourself, because sometimes we say yes to too many things that we don't really need to, and then we're kind of creating our own problem, right? Okay. All right, so you guys ready for the most unpopular one? Here it is. I'll let this sit for a second. Uh-oh. There it is. I said it. I did it. Okay. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. This is in no way to call anybody out today. It's okay. If you don't have your cameras on. If you're in a meeting with your intact team, I would say have your cameras on. It's really important, and I know it's uncomfortable sometimes. I know that people aren't always comfortable with it, but we wouldn't have, can you imagine if we went into a meeting in person and we all sat there with bags over our heads and we just talked without seeing each other? Like, no, we wouldn't do that. That would be ridiculous, right? We'd be like, this is ridiculous. What are we doing here? Turn your camera on. And whenever I teach a class, and especially even sometimes I'll teach classes to nurses who just got off their shift or what have you, I never care where anybody's tuning in from. I've had people sit in their armchairs, lay in their bed, like attend a training. I'm just like, man, I'm just so glad you're here. I don't mind. Show up as you are. I don't care what you look like. I'm just excited to be here and connect with people. So turn your cameras on. Try to encourage your team to have their cameras on. I know for some people and for some work styles, it could feel a little intimidating, but there's so much benefit to it, because it does create a sense of community and connection. And you also don't know who might need that and who might feel isolated when that doesn't exist, right? And if people are feeling that way, do you think it can impact the way that they really start to engage in the meeting if they have this feeling of isolation anyway, and the way that they're going to understand data, digest information? They might, because there's a personal element going on, right? So again, turn your cameras on. It just helps everybody be present. And then remember, we said there's a lack of social cues on Zoom. You're never going to know what people's social cues are. You're not even going to be able to start to guess if you can't see them. Okay. So that's just for your meetings. So moving forward, try to do it to the best of your ability. Something that my team did the other day, it was actually really funny. They did it we did it on Monday at a team meeting, because they did it to celebrate my birthday. My birthday was that last weekend. So what we did is we had a meeting, but we all used the avatar function. So we all just sat there giving each other information and avatars. And it was like the funniest thing. We were still listening to the information, because at some point you forget that you're in avatar form and you're just having a conversation, but it was hilarious, and it just didn't feel threatening, and it made everything feel very lighthearted, and we were all just giving information and cracking up, but it was actually a really fun way to be on camera. So there's different ways you can make it fun for people who might think it's a little uncomfortable. So get creative, get innovative. try to have your cameras on. It's even if it's a cartoon of you, it doesn't matter, right? It's something. So I think that goes a long way. And again, I think as adults, we can always use a little humor in our day-to-day, especially with meetings. So, I mean, why not feel a little ridiculous and find our inner child and enjoy it, you know? So try, again, whatever that looks like for you and your team. Okay, now, next, we want to use artificial cues, artificial social cues. Okay, what do you think this looks like? What do you think that could potentially be? Yeah, exactly, right? The thumb raise, the partying. Yes, the thumbs up, all the artificial cues, right? Even like you can go through them. There's so many of them, you know, like it's like an emoji list, you know. This one's always a good one, you know, celebrating, you're dancing through life, whatever. Yeah, all the emojis, right? So sometimes you can do that. You can tell somebody, you know, we're going to talk about a report today. I want to hear what everybody has to say, but I actually want to hear it through emojis. And then everybody's going to tell you their story or their response via emoji, right? There's ways to get very creative about it. Like, do you guys like this or do you not like this? Thumbs up, thumbs down, maybe a face, you know, whatever it could be. There's ways for you to make your meetings really engaging using artificial social cues, right? Another way to do that is also the hand raise. Like, okay, I want to hear from everybody, but I want you to raise your hand so I can pick on people when they have something to say. Any of that, right? So that all allows you to also see people are engaged. They are listening, right? So again, try to use that whenever you can virtually. And then when you are working and you are on site, you don't need the artificial cues because you'll be in person, right? So you could just tell people, give me the thumbs up, thumbs down, raise your hand if you have something to say. And again, invite people to do that because a lot of times people will sit back in meetings and just listen and kind of listen and leave. So you want to say, hey, I want to know your thoughts. When I say something you like, show me. When I say something you don't like, show me. If you have something you want to ask me, show me, right? So make people be engaged. Now, I'm telling you to do this for your meetings, but in turn, do this at other people's meetings. Because I think there's nothing better than when you're facilitating a meeting and you have somebody who's engaged with you. You're just like, wow, okay, awesome. People are in it with me. This is amazing. So I want you to think about your next meeting. I said I want this to be tangible for you. So we already took a look at providing data first. What does that look like? What data do you need to give first? Don't over invite. Is your list appropriate for people coming? Are you going to have your camera on? Is it on site, right? Is it virtual? If you are going to have your cameras on and that's new to your team, give them a heads up. Heads up, we're going to have our cameras on. If anybody wants to bring a fun background, our theme is fall. Perfect. Whatever it is, right? Make it exciting. Use artificial cues if you're going to be virtual. If you're not, again, just speak to it. So kind of plan that out. Are you using the artificial social cues or are you in person? All right, and here's the next tip. I want you to really look at your meeting. How long is the meeting that you're going to be having? How long is it? How long do you guys have it scheduled for? Put it in the chat, your next meeting. One hour, 45 minutes, an hour and 15 minutes, an hour, 45, 2-hour training session. Okay. All right. So if it's a meeting that you have control over, I want you to consider this. Can you shorten your meetings? Does it have to be that long or did you just give that time? Now, if you're like, I don't know, I don't think I can shorten it. Virtual meetings, the longest they should be, if you really want people to retain, no longer than 50 minutes, not a full hour. Otherwise, people aren't going to retain the information after that. You're going to lose people midway. So 50 minutes should be kind of your max if it's an intact team. Now, if you're working on a project and it has to be a longer meeting and you're trying to divvy stuff up, I would say 50 minutes still, take a break, take a 10-minute break, and then come back if it's virtual. Because sitting virtually for that long, it's really hard for people to gauge. If we were going to be hitting a little over an hour today for our meeting, I wouldn't have you sit the whole time. I would take a break, have you get up and come back, because sitting is just not, sitting in front of a screen is not very good for us anyway. So can you shorten your meetings? And if you're nervous about it, can you shorten your meetings just to start by maybe 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes, right? So you don't have to tell anybody this ahead of time, but this is for you to know if you're facilitating the meeting. You know, okay, my meeting starts at 9:30. I'm going to try to end it instead of 10:15. I'm going to try to end it at like 10:10. But I'm not going to tell anybody that. I'm just going to try to facilitate accordingly. Okay. So think about when you can shorten your meetings. And what I also want you to consider too is, if you were in person, would the meeting be as long, or do we just do that because it's Zoom and we feel like we need to take more time? Something I have noticed in the meetings that I'm in, I'm in way more meetings now than I was in person. It's like I feel a lot more popular, but I'm also like, why is that? And it's because it's a lot easier to find me and to put me on the schedule. You know, I'm going to show up on a link, versus like if you have to have an in-person meeting, you're like, where are we going to meet? What time? This doesn't work. So let's just do it as an email. So also consider that, right? When it's coming to a Zoom aspect. So shorten your meeting if you can. I think that you'll find that it gives you some time, your team some time, and just try to consider that. And I would try to say, you know, if you have to go, I see a couple of us have like a little bit of a longer meeting time, add in a break period for sure. At least 5 minutes, if not, 5 to 10 minutes if you can, just to get people away from their screen, because that will have them come back a little bit more ready to engage. Okay. And then the next one, your meeting basics. This sounds very basic, right? But what is a meeting basic? What do you have at your meeting? So in the chat, tell me what you have in your meetings currently. Do you just have an overall agenda? Do you have it bullet pointed out what you're going to talk about? Is it just one big thing that you're like, we're going to talk about this program? It's like, okay, well, what about the program? What are you talking about? Right? So we have agendas. Okay, good. Agendas are good. Remember, if you have, looking at your next meeting, if you have it over, where can you fit a break time? We have by topics. Okay. Do we have people who are involved, right? Who's involved with each component to spell that out? Sometimes, especially via Zoom, it's always great to spell things out, break it down even further for people. So we're working on a big project right now, a big program. Some of you might have heard of that. We're launching a leadership development program. We're doing it cohort style. So with that, we each own a piece. So there's leads on it, but there's teams on it too. So when we meet about it, we have the leads with their teams, and we kind of spell out, this is the lead, this is what they're talking about. This is the lead, this is the team. Just to give us that visual so we can see it, so we can really digest it. Because again, if we just said that, if I just told you every lead and every person, you'd maybe remember one or two. And not because you're not trying to pay attention. It's just because it's a little bit harder to digest information via Zoom. And if you're in person, always have your documents. People are different learners, right? We have our kinesthetic learners, we have our visual learners, our audiology learners, right? So we have different types of styles of learning to make sure you're covering all platforms. So for your next meeting, do you have all the learning styles covered of how everybody takes in information? Do you have a follow-up email you're going to send with information? Do you have something for them to look at briefly, either before, during, or after, right? So all of these different elements. And if you don't, see which one you can maybe fill the gap, or maybe if one needs a little bit more enhancing. Okay, awesome. Something I love about agenda items too, when people are looking at it, is even putting a time frame. Okay, we're going to talk about this for 10 minutes. We're going to talk about this for 5 minutes. It's great to facilitate meetings like that because it helps keep you on track. And sometimes it's easy for information we talk about one topic and it spirals, and you talk about that topic for so long that you rush through other things or don't get to other things. So this keeps it for you, saying, okay, here's our meeting basics, here's the time frame for each element. And if you see something starting to spiral, it's easy to say, I don't know if we'll be able to have that response during this forum, but let's write that down because I think it's something for us to consider and continue the conversation. But I don't know if we can do that here today, as this meeting, this is what we're covering, right? So sticking to what you're covering and not letting it, again, go further out. Okay, any questions about that? And what I just said kind of went into our next bullet point here too, which was set expectations, right? So again, setting the expectations is letting people also know what the meeting is for. So I had a training that I did with an Intact team last week. And through the training, we're training on emotional intelligence. And through the training, there were things that were being brought up and things that I couldn't address during that time. And it was not because I didn't want to or because I didn't care to, but it was because of the time. So again, I set the expectation of today's class, this is what we're going to be covering. I don't want you to feel that I don't value what you're saying or that I don't want to validate what you're saying. I just think due to time, I'm not able to step into that space right now. But I really want to continue this conversation with you. So let's continue the conversation on a different forum or at a different time, right? So again, it's setting those expectations. And I think that what happens quite a bit is when a meeting starts to kind of go array, we want people to feel like, no, but I want everybody to feel like they had a voice and everybody to feel like they participated. So we get into this space of like, okay. I guarantee you, if you set the expectation, say, yeah, we're not going to talk about that today, but we will tomorrow. People will appreciate that because they'll appreciate the fact that you're sticking to a particular agenda, you're sticking to a particular time frame. People will always appreciate that, right? But there's always ways, again, to set expectations in a way that doesn't make anybody feel uninvited to the conversation or anything like that, but it just gives structure. Structure, I think, as much as people sometimes want autonomy and want all that stuff, I think people really enjoy structure when it comes to meetings. They just want to have the meeting and they kind of want to get off, right? So keep that in mind too. So what are the expectations? Looking at your next meeting, if you were to list 2 main expectations from that meeting, what would they be? What would be your top 2 expectations that you would want your team to know for that meeting? And let's say your next meeting is one that you're not facilitating yourself. Do you know the expectations of that meeting? Because if you don't, it's okay to ask. Hey, I just want to know really the expectations of the meeting. What are we coming in for? What are we going to be talking about? I just want to make sure I'm showing up with whatever you might need. Because if you're not clear about that, it's not going to be a productive meeting from the get-go, right? So if you're unsure as to why you're attending a meeting, ask. It's okay to ask these questions just so that you can be prepared. Expectation. What materials need to be provided? How do they need to be completed for submission? Yeah, I love that, Stacy. That's so clear and concise, and everybody's like, okay, great. Now I know, right? I love that. I think that that's awesome. So setting expectations like that. Now, what I do want to say, when you're trying to create a really productive meeting, it will take you more preparation, right? It takes you a little bit because you're trying to like really find all these things. But I guarantee you that little time that you spend up front doing it, you'll save all that time in the future when people are like, what did we talk about? What was happening? So you're really saving yourself a lot of time too, right? So it's really beneficial for you in that regard. And the last tip, and I really think this is the most important tip, end with clarity, right? End with clarity. It is, I think, one of the highest stressors in a work environment, from what I've gathered with different teams I've worked with, when people don't know what they're supposed to be doing. They're like, they said it, but I'm not clear about it. I don't really know. I just feel stressed. That's one of the biggest stressors. People leave and they're like, wait, did we agree to that? Did we not agree to that? How many of you can relate to ending a meeting and you're like, we just talked, but I have no idea what we talked about, right? It's like, I don't know if we're moving forward with this, or I don't know if we're not moving forward with this. So end with clarity. Be very, very, very clear. This is what we're doing next. This is the next time we're meeting. This is what I'm delegating. This is who's in charge of it. This is how we're going to roll forward. This is when I'm, all of that. People really, really, really need that. Now, again, sometimes when you end that way, it can feel a little assertive at certain elements because you're saying, this is what we're doing. This is how we're moving forward. And again, I want you to recognize that's not a bad thing in terms of being clear. People appreciate it, right? There's always ways to say it that you could rub somebody the wrong way if you don't say it in a nice way. But people really need clarity, particularly on Zoom. That is one of the top trending areas where people struggle, is they don't feel that there's clarity. They don't know who's doing what. They don't know who owns what. They're not sure about the different roles that they have, right? That's where people start to get like, well, is it my job or is it their job? Or are you supposed to be doing it or am I supposed to be doing it? Right? So be very, very, very clear and always ask for understanding. So I just want to make sure, does everybody understand the directive? And if you want a round robin at that point, you say, okay, so Chava, when are you going to have X, Y, and Z done? I'll have that done for you by Friday. Great. Okay. Carla, when are you going to have this one done? I'll have it. It's okay to do that to make sure everybody's on the same page. It helps with team cohesion as well to have productive meetings in that regard. Right? So end with clarity. So be sure that whatever your main purpose was in your mind to have that meeting, everybody leaves knowing that. Okay. All right. I know that was a lot of information to give you regarding meetings and some do's and don'ts. So this is where I open it up to you and say, what questions do you have for me? Any tips for managing up by implying these steps? I'm not hosting any of the meetings I have, but I'd like to implement these tips. Yeah. Okay. So because you're not hosting them, but you want for whoever else is. So something I've learned that's really great, and it's very non-threatening, is to always share information, right? To say, I just took this training, I just did this workshop, and I found it so helpful, and I would really like to share some tips. So here are some things that they spoke about, maybe we can implement these in some of our meetings. I think when you're trying to do a knowledge transfer with, anybody who is facilitating a meeting and just doing it in a way of like, I learned these really great things I'm very excited about. I think that that's one area to do, and to just share it again. And I'm going to send Carla this slide deck, so all of you will have a copy of it, so you can also see all the different areas and you can share that out. That's completely fine with me if you want to say, hey, like here's some tips and tricks. You can also always, if it's an intact team, Maya, let's say, you're like, hey, I just went through this workshop. I would really love for everybody to go through this workshop. I found it so beneficial, and you want to do it with your intact team. That is also something that we do. So the information is coming from us if you feel that that's better for some people to digest than if somebody else is giving the information, right? Sometimes that happens. So we always do special sessions for a team. So if that's something of interest for your intact team to go through this all together, so everybody has the same foundation, we can do that. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, so Stacy, how do we minimize negative impact with meetings that are held in an effort to provide emotional support to attendees? Okay, but that includes data sharing that may be upsetting and thus result in a need for meeting recovery regardless. Okay, so not fully knowing the full scope, Stacy, and again, like if you want to give me more specifics offline, I'm happy to talk to you about it a little bit further to understand it a little bit more. So what I'm, for a blanket statement, I guess, emotional support, I think that there's always going to be, if you're having a conversation because of emotional support, I think there's always going to be a factor of a meeting recovery at the end of it, because when people are unloading emotions, that can feel really draining. That can feel really, heavy for some people, and they might need time to digest that regardless. And that has nothing to do with how you're facilitating it. So that's a point too, is everybody's going to experience their emotions the way that they experience it. As long as we're showing up kind and compassionate and really there to hear and value people, that's really all we can do on our end. And people's emotional journeys it's kind of their own in a way, right? You can't make somebody feel something. That's as adults, it's kind of on us to manage all of those. The pandemic included lots of this, but major staff transitions. Yeah. Yeah, I'm kind of curious, Stacey, to learn a little bit more, because I feel like I want to answer your question to the best of my ability, but I think because I'm not knowing exactly the circumstances, I might not be able to give you the full answer that you want. So if you are interested to talk to me after, I'm happy to do that. But I would say again, and I kind of teach on this with emotional intelligence too, is that whenever somebody's going or having an emotional element, there is a way for us to, again, show up. We want to have that social awareness for people's emotions and that relationship management aspect. But at the end of the day, people's emotions are also theirs. So if I'm aware that I'm feeling a certain way, I want to say, that's something for me to say, I'm feeling this way because of X, Y, and Z, and I kind of need to work through that on my own. But depending on your role, and again, if your role does not include, you're not their therapist or anything like that, sometimes we're limited as to what we can do for people in terms of help. So I think that what you're explaining has different layers to it. So I'm kind of curious to learn a little bit more. But generally speaking, I would say that if people feel that they need an emotional recovery from stuff, as long as you showed up again and you gave them the space to feel really cared for, some people are just going to need their time to process emotions, and that's okay. That's totally okay, right? People, that's their prerogative, and they're allowed to do that. Minimizing tools used to manage track information discussed at meetings to avoid looking through notebooks, post-its, avoid being lost at meetings and backtracking. Yeah, so using different tools, I think sometimes using a one-shot tool for everybody is really helpful. So for example, my team, we use Monday.com. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but we use Monday.com, and we actually pay for the subscription to it. There's a free version too. But it houses all of our projects, all of our information, where we keep notes and we keep updated. So when we have our weekly meetings, we go to the Monday boards and we kind of we look through them, and we're like, okay, yeah, that's where we're at. And we give high level because we're kind of constantly checking them as our workflow throughout the week. So it doesn't feel like we're getting lost in the system and looking at a bunch of different things. It's more so we know that we have to look at it before Monday morning. So every week by Friday, we take a look, make sure everything's up to date. So by Monday, we can high level report out of where everything's at. So that's really helped our team by minimizing this one and that one and using post-its and stuff like that. And it helps you keep really organized because you're using one system. So this is kind of talks about another class that I teach, is called Getting Things Done. And it's all about being productive at work. Essentially, a high level overview of that class, don't use a lot of tools. Like find one or two tools that you use to maintain all of your information. Otherwise, you're going to get lost, and you're going to be looking through things, and it's not going to be helpful for you. And you're going to look lost in meetings if you're trying to find where everything is housed. So that would be my one tip for there as well. Any other questions? Any other things coming up for anybody? Okay. All right. OneNote has been great for me. I have different notebooks for different meetings. Yeah, OneNote is actually very popular. People love OneNote, especially because it attaches to Microsoft Teams. So it's very user-friendly for all of our stuff here as well. So that's a popular one if people aren't familiar with it. Good thing to look into. It will keep you organized for all your meetings too. Thank you for sharing that tip. All right. Well, again, as we said about productive meetings, I don't need to keep you longer just because we were scheduled till 1. I can give you some time back. Carla, I guess I could pass it to you in case you have anything to close everybody out with. But thank you all so much. I hope this was helpful and to just give you some good tips and tricks to you. So, Carla, I will pass. Oh, I didn't see Stephanie. How to create a culture that moves away from labeling productivity based on numbers meetings. Perceive this as not as busy. That is yeah, that's a great question. And I think that that's a culture shift that has to happen. So culture shift, anytime there's a culture shift, it is gonna take some time. So I want you to know that. So it does take some time with culture shifts. What I will say though too is I've had a lot of people come to me and say that, because something I tell everyone is don't front load your calendars. Like, don't make it look like you have something to do at every single hour, because it's going to stress you out. You're going to work from a place of feeling stressed out. You're going to be overwhelmed. You're going to burn out. It's all not good, because it's aesthetically unpleasing to your eyes. So if you look at my calendar, you will see so many blank spots. It is not because I'm not working. It is not because I'm not busy. All that means to me is that in that time frame, if something comes up at the last minute, I had some flexibility to jump on or help out or whatever it is, because I'm not tied to whatever I'm doing. I'm giving myself some flexibility. The times where I'm like, I can't be interrupted, I need to get this work done, I block it off my schedule so nobody can touch it. Right. So I think, Stephanie, for you, I think that is a conversation. It's a culture shift, and saying, hey, I really am busy, but it's not listed on my calendar, just because I'm flexible with my time right there. So I'm not blocking it off, but I'm still working. But if somebody needs me, I can jump on a call, I can jump on a Zoom, I can walk down the hall for a meeting, whatever it is. So what I have seen people do is, again, conversation. In order to change any culture shift, conversation. And it all starts with, hey, sometimes I feel like I have to throw things on my calendar because it makes us look more productive, but I don't really feel like that's really benefiting us. Can we talk about other ways to do that? Can we talk about how we might change that environment? So that's what I would do. Hopefully that helps. All right. Let me know if I'm missing any other questions. Looks like I got everything, I think. Okay. If there's any questions I didn't get to, or you want to talk to me offline, you have my name. You can find me in Outlook. Just shoot me an email, and we will get a very short, productive meeting on the books to help whatever you need. But I'm always here to support you all. You all know that. So please, if there's ever anything that you need, never hesitate to reach out to me. I'm more than happy to help you with whatever I can. So I'm here for you. And thank you so much for your time and attention. I really appreciate it. Now, Carla, over to you.
Thank you, Chava. It has been a pleasure to have you today. Thank you for joining us. And thank you, everyone, also for joining us during your lunchtime and making it a super productive meeting, tackling lunch, hopefully, while being here. And we hope that you can take these tips and apply them to your daily work and maybe even personal. So have a beautiful day and a lovely weekend. Thank you, everyone. Have a good one.
Bye, everybody.